The massive white ship moved through space like a gentle giant. The Hippocrates was the largest hospital ship in the galaxy, and it carried hope wherever it went. Dr. Minho Kim stood at the medical bay window watching the stars pass by. He had just finished saving 300 Cytherian children from a deadly disease that their own doctors could not cure. Minho wiped his tired hands on his white coat and smiled. This was why he became a doctor. This was why humanity had built these great ships of healing. Every day they saved lives across the galaxy, and every species knew that when Earth's white ships arrived, help was coming. Chief Medical Admiral Ji-won Park walked into the medical bay carrying her tablet. She looked tired, but happy. The Cytherians were finally safe, and their planet was free of the plague that had been killing them for months. Ji-won had been leading the Terran Medical Corps for 10 years, and she had never lost a patient that could be saved. "How are our new friends doing?" Ji-won asked Minho as she checked the monitors showing the Cytherian children in the recovery rooms. "All stable," Minho replied. "The youngest ones are already asking when they can go home to see their families." Ji-won nodded and touched the screen showing a small Cytherian girl who was sleeping peacefully. The girl had been dying just 2 days ago, but now her vital signs were perfect. This was what made all the long hours worth it. The Hippocrates was not alone in space. 11 other hospital ships traveled with it, making up the complete Mercy fleet. Each ship was the size of a small city and carried thousands of doctors, nurses, and medical workers from Earth. They had the most advanced medical technology in the galaxy, and they used it to help anyone who needed it for free. Dr. Sora Choi was working in the research lab trying to understand a new virus that had appeared on the edge of known space. She had been studying alien diseases for 8 years and had helped create cures for 17 different plagues. Her work had saved millions of lives across dozens of worlds. "Any progress on the Vegan flu?" asked Chief Nurse Hyunwoo Nam as he brought Sora a cup of coffee. "Getting close," Sora said without looking up from her microscope. "This virus is tricky, but I think I know how to stop it." Hyunwoo smiled and left her to work. He had seen Sora solve problems that other scientists said were impossible. If anyone could cure the Vegan flu, it was her. Captain Gina Song commanded the escort destroyer Asclepius that traveled with the hospital ships. Her job was to protect the medical fleet if any pirates or hostile forces tried to attack them. It was usually boring work because most species in the galaxy respected the hospital ships too much to attack them. Gina walked onto the bridge of her small warship and checked the sensor readings. Space was peaceful and quiet. The nearest military vessels belonged to the Galactic Council, and they were 3 days away. Everything looked normal. "Any interesting signals?" Gina asked her communications officer. "Just the usual trading messages and civilian traffic," the officer replied. "Oh, and we got another thank you message from the Cytherian government." Gina smiled. The Cytherians had been sending thank you messages every few hours since the Mercy fleet had arrived to help them. It was nice to be appreciated, even though the medical teams never asked for anything in return. Back on Earth, Admiral Tae-hyung Lee sat in his office looking at reports from the Terran Defense Force. The military was much smaller than the medical corps because humanity had decided long ago that healing was more important than fighting. Most of Earth's resources went to building hospital ships and training doctors instead of making weapons. Tae-hyung sometimes wondered if this was wise, but then he would read reports like the one from the Hippocrates about saving the Cytherian children, and he knew humanity had made the right choice. The galaxy was a better place because Earth chose to heal instead of hurt. His assistant brought him a message from the outer colonies. Pirates had been raiding supply ships near the Vorten system, but the local defense forces were handling it. Nothing that required the main fleet to get involved. Tae-hyung approved sending some medical supplies to help any civilians who had been hurt in the pirate attacks. This was how humanity worked. Even when dealing with crime and violence, their first thought was always about helping the victims. Dr. Yuna Han was in the pediatric ward of the Hippocrates, playing with some of the Catherian children who were well, enough to be out of bed. She specialized in treating alien children and had a gift for making young patients feel safe and happy even when they were very sick. One little Catherian boy tugged on her white coat and asked, "Are all humans nice like?" Yuna smiled and knelt down to his level. "We try to be," she said. "My people believe that helping others is the most important thing we can do." The boy nodded seriously and then went back to playing with his toys. Yuna watched him and felt proud of what humanity had become. They were known across the galaxy as the healers, the ones who came when things were hopeless and made them better. The communication system on the Hippocrates suddenly came alive with an urgent message. Admiral Park hurried to the command center where the main screen showed a panicked alien face. It was a Velthak official, and he looked terrified. "Please," the Velthak said, "we need help. A plague has appeared on our border worlds, and it is killing everyone. Our doctors cannot stop it, and millions are dying. The Terran Medical Corps is our only hope." Jiwan looked at the message, and then at her staff. The Velthak Empire was on the other side of the galaxy. It would take the Mercy Fleet 5 days to get there even at maximum speed. But people were dying, and Earth's healers never turned away from those who needed help. "Signal the entire fleet," Jiwan ordered. "We are changing course for the Velthak. System immediately. Send word to Earth that we are responding to a medical emergency." Dr. Kim heard the announcement and began preparing his surgical teams for what might be ahead. Dr. Choi started gathering everything she knew about Velthak biology. Nurse Nam organized medical supplies and made sure they had everything needed to treat a large outbreak. Captain Song increased the escort destroyer's sensor sweeps and began plotting the fastest route to Velthak space. Something about the message bothered her, but she could not say what. Maybe it was just the urgency in the alien's voice, or maybe it was something else. Admiral Park stood on the bridge watching the stars change direction as the great white ships turned toward a new crisis. She had been doing this job for 10 years and had seen humanity save countless lives across the galaxy. This would be no different. They would arrive, help the Velthak people beat the plague, and then continue on to the next crisis. She had no way of knowing that this rescue mission would be their last. She had no way of knowing that the gentle white ships carrying Earth's healers were flying toward a trap that would change humanity forever. She only knew that people were dying and Earth's children had the power to save them. The Mercy Fleet accelerated toward the Velthak system, carrying 50,000 of humanity's best doctors, nurses, and medical workers. They flew through space, like angels of mercy, ready to battle death itself to save innocent lives. Behind them, Earth waited proudly for news of another successful mission. None of them knew that in 5 days everything would change. None of them knew that the galaxy was about to learn what happened when you attacked Earth's healers. The Mercy Fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Velthak system and immediately saw the signs of disaster. Orbital stations hung dark and silent around the main world. Emergency beacons flashed red warnings across all communication channels. Ships drifted without power between the planets. Admiral Jiwan Park stood on the bridge of the Hippocrates and watched the sensor readings with growing concern. The Velthak system looked like a war zone, but there were no enemy ships visible, just the aftermath of some terrible catastrophe that had crippled an entire star system. "Get me a communication channel to the surface," Jiwan ordered her bridge crew. The main screen flickered and showed a Velthak medical center that looked like chaos. Doctors and nurses ran between patients lying on every available surface. Bodies, covered in sheets, were stacked in corners. The alien medical staff looked exhausted and hopeless. "Thank the stars you came," said the Velthak doctor who appeared on screen. "The plague started 3 weeks ago on our outer colonies, and now it has reached the homeworld. We have lost millions already and we cannot stop it. Dr. Sora Choi studied the images of the sick Velthak people and frowned. The symptoms looked strange even for an unknown disease. The pattern of infection did not make sense for a natural plague. Something felt wrong about the whole situation. We need samples of the disease and full medical records of the infected, Sora told Admiral Park. I want to start analyzing this plague immediately. Dr. Minho Kim was already preparing his surgical teams and gathering medical supplies. The scale of the crisis was enormous, but he had seen the Terran Medical Corps handle disasters this large before. They would work around the clock until every Velthak who could be saved was healthy again. Chief Nurse Hyun-woo Nam coordinated with the other hospital ships to set up emergency treatment centers on the planet's surface. 12 massive white ships began deploying their medical teams and equipment to help the dying Velthak people. Captain Gina Song watched all this activity from the bridge of her escort destroyer and tried to shake the feeling that something was very wrong. The Velthak system was too quiet. Where were their defense fleets? Where were the emergency response ships from neighboring systems? Why was Earth's Mercy fleet the only help that had arrived? Run a full sensor sweep of the system, Gina ordered her crew. Look for anything unusual. Sensors show normal space. Debris and civilian traffic, her sensor officer reported. No military vessels detected. But Gina was not satisfied. She had been protecting medical fleets for 5 years and had learned to trust her instincts. Something about this rescue mission felt like a trap. Down on the planet's surface, Dr. Choi worked frantically in a temporary laboratory analyzing samples of the plague. The disease was unlike anything she had ever seen. It attacked Velthak's cellular structure in a very specific way that seemed almost designed to target their species. This is not a natural plague, Sora told Dr. Kim over the communication link. This disease was created in a laboratory. Someone made this bioweapon specifically to kill Velthak people. Minho paused in his surgery and considered what this meant. If the plague was a weapon, then who had deployed it? And why were the Velthak asking for help instead of reporting an attack to the Galactic Council? Keep working on a cure, Minho told Sora. We can worry about who made this after we save these people. For 3 days, the medical teams worked without rest. Nurse Nam had not slept more than 2 hours at a time since they arrived. Dr. Kim performed surgeries for 18 hours straight. Every human medical worker pushed themselves to their limits to save Velthak lives. Dr. Choi finally had a breakthrough on the 3rd day. She had figured out how the bioweapon worked and developed a cure that could neutralize it. Within hours, the Terran Medical Corps began mass-producing the cure and distributing it across the planet. The results were immediate and dramatic. Velthak people who had been dying just hours before began recovering rapidly. Families were reunited. As loved ones opened their eyes for the first time in weeks, the death toll stopped climbing and started falling as more people received the cure. Admiral Park felt the familiar satisfaction of another successful mission. Once again, Earth's healers had arrived in time to save a dying world. The Velthak government was already sending messages of gratitude and promising to honor humanity forever for this rescue. But Captain Song was still worried. She had been monitoring space around the system and something felt wrong about the lack of other ships. Even in a crisis this large, there should have been some kind of Galactic Council response or at least civilian relief efforts from other species. Admiral, I recommend we prepare to leave the system as soon as the medical teams are finished, Song told Park over the communication channel. I do not like how isolated we are out here. The Velthak people are almost completely cured, Park replied. We should be ready to depart in 12 hours. Is there a specific threat you are worried about? Song could not point to anything specific, but her military training told her they were vulnerable. 12 slow hospital ships with minimal defenses, far from any help, was exactly the kind of target that pirates or hostile forces would love to attack. Just a feeling, Song admitted. But my feelings have kept medical fleets safe before. That night, as the last Velthak patients received their cures and began recovering, Dr. Yuna Han was playing with Velthak children in one of the emergency medical centers. The young aliens were laughing and running around for the first time in weeks. Their parents watched with tears of joy as their children played games with the human doctor who had helped save their lives. "Will you visit us again?" asked a little Veltak girl as she hugged Dr. Han. "I hope so," Yuna replied. "My people love to help and we love making new friends." The child smiled and ran back to her family. Yuna watched them reunite and felt proud of what humanity had accomplished. In just 3 days, they had saved an entire species from extinction. This was why Earth built hospital ships instead of warships. Admiral Park was in her quarters reviewing the final medical reports when the ship's alarm system suddenly activated. Red lights flashed throughout the Hippocrates as the emergency communication system came online. "All medical personnel report to emergency stations immediately," came the announcement. "Unknown vessels have been detected approaching the system." Park rushed to the bridge where she found her crew staring at sensor displays in shock. Hundreds of ships were decloaking around the Velthak system. They had been hiding using advanced stealth technology, and now they surrounded the Mercy fleet. "Completely!" Captain Song's voice came over the communication channel, sounding grim and angry. "Admiral, those are Keth Dominion warships. We are looking at over 300 enemy vessels, and they have us completely surrounded." The main screen activated and showed the bridge of a Keth warship. The alien commander was a massive creature with scarred hide and cold, predatory eyes. This was Warlord Thrakmos, the most feared military leader in the Keth Dominion. "Humans of the Terran Medical Corps," Thrakmos said in a voice like grinding metal. "You have fallen into our trap perfectly. Your reputation for helping anyone in need made this so easy to arrange." Admiral Park felt cold understanding wash over her. The plague had been a weapon deployed by the Keth. The desperate calls for help had been bait. The entire rescue mission had been designed to lure Earth's healers into a position where they could be captured or destroyed. "What do you want?" Park asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Thrakmos smiled, showing rows of sharp teeth. "Your medical technology has made the galaxy soft and weak. Species that once fought proper wars now waste time healing their enemies instead of conquering them. This ends today." The warlord leaned forward on his command throne. "Surrender your ships and technology to us or watch as we demonstrate what happens to those who make the galaxy weak with their mercy." Around the system, 300 Keth warships powered up their weapons and targeted the 12 defenseless hospital ships. The trap was complete, and Earth's greatest healers were about to learn that not everyone in the galaxy appreciated their gift of mercy. Admiral Jaiwan Park stared at the massive Keth warlord on her screen and felt something she had never experienced before in her years leading the medical corps. Pure rage burned in her chest as she realized how completely they had been betrayed. The dying Velthak people had been real, but their suffering had been caused by the very monsters now demanding surrender. "We will never give you our medical technology," Park said with steel in her voice. "Earth's healing knowledge belongs to all species, not to warmongers who create suffering for profit." Warlord Thrakmos laughed, and the sound was like breaking glass. "Your mercy makes you weak human. Today the galaxy learns what happens to those who refuse the strong." The communication ended, and space erupted into violence. 300 Keth warships opened fire simultaneously on the 12 hospital ships. Plasma beams and missile volleys tore through space toward the white vessels that had spent decades saving lives across the galaxy. Captain Gina Song screamed orders to her destroyer crew as she tried desperately to intercept some of the incoming fire. The Asclepius was fast and well-armed, but it was one small ship against an entire fleet. Her point defense guns shot down missiles, and her shields absorbed energy blasts, but there was simply too much incoming fire to stop. The hospital ship Galen took the first direct hits. Massive explosions tore through its medical bays as Kith. Plasma beams punched through the hull designed for healing, not fighting. Emergency alarms wailed across all frequencies as the great white ship began to break apart. Dr. Minho Kim was in Surgery Bay 12 when the first explosions hit the Hippocrates. The ship lurched violently, throwing him against the wall as power systems failed throughout the medical section. Emergency lighting cast red shadows over operating tables, where he had been trying to save a young Velthak patient. "Get to the escape pods!" Kim shouted to his surgical team as another explosion rocked the ship. "Save yourselves!" But Kim could not abandon his patient. The Velthak child was still unconscious from surgery and would die if left behind. Kim lifted the small alien in his arms and ran toward the evacuation areas as the ship shook itself apart around him. The children's ward was in chaos as Chief Nurse Hyunwoo Nam tried to evacuate hundreds of young patients. Human medical staff carried alien children toward escape pods while explosions tore holes in the hull around them. Nam organized the evacuation with calm efficiency, even as he knew there were not enough escape pods for everyone. "Get the children out first," Nam ordered his nurses. "The adults can wait." A massive explosion destroyed the port side of the children's ward, and Nam was thrown across the room. When he tried to stand, he realized his legs were broken and he could not move. But he could still see Keth fighter craft shooting at the escape pods as they launched. "Run!" Nam whispered to the children still trapped in the ward. "Save yourselves!" Dr. Sora Choi was in her laboratory when the attack began. She had been working on improvements to the Velthak cure when the ship's hull was breached just meters from her workstation. The laboratory depressurized instantly, and she was sucked toward the hole in the ship's side. Choi managed to grab onto a workbench and held on as equipment and research data were pulled into space around her. She could see Keth fighters outside the hull hunting for survivors to kill. Her 8 years of disease research and the cures for 17 different plagues would die with her. With her last breath, Choi managed to activate the laboratory's emergency transmission system. Her research data uploaded to Earth in a final burst of information before the laboratory was completely destroyed. The hospital ship Florence lasted longer than the others because Captain Song had positioned her destroyer nearby to provide cover. The Asclepius threw everything it had at the Keith fighters, but eventually the overwhelming numbers broke through. Dr. Yuna Han was in the Florence's pediatric ward, trying to protect the Velthak children she had been playing with just hours before. The little girl who had asked if all humans were nice clung to Yuna's coat as explosions lit up the corridor outside. "I am scared," the child whispered in broken human language. "Do not be afraid," Yuna told her softly. "We will protect you." But even as she spoke those words, a Keth plasma torpedo punched through the pediatric ward's outer wall. The explosion consumed everything in blinding light, and the last thing Yuna saw was the trusting face of the alien child who had believed humans would keep her safe. One by one, the great white ships died. The Pasteur broke in half when its reactor was hit. The Nightingale was swarmed by fighters that tore it apart piece by piece. The Jenner tried to ram a Keth cruiser, but was destroyed before it could strike back. 50,000 of Earth's finest medical personnel died in the space of 20 minutes. Doctors who had saved millions of lives were burned alive in their own hospitals. Nurses who had comforted the dying across a dozen species suffocated as their ships lost atmosphere. Researchers whose work had eliminated diseases were vaporized, along with decades of irreplaceable knowledge. Only the Hippocrates survived the initial assault, and only because Captain Song threw her destroyer between it and the worst of the enemy fire. The Asclepius died protecting the flagship, but its sacrifice bought enough time for some people to escape. Admiral Park stood on the bridge of her dying ship and watched 11 hospital ships burn in space around her. The communication system crackled with the screams and final messages of her people as they died. The greatest rescue fleet in galactic history had become a funeral pyre. The hull of the Hippocrates was breached in 17 places, and life support was failing throughout the ship. Less than 3,000 people remained alive out of the 50,000 who had answered the Velthak distress call. Most of them were trapped in sections of the ship that were losing atmosphere. "Admiral, we have to abandon ship," her bridge officer reported. "Main reactor is going critical in 8 minutes." Park looked at the tactical display showing Keth fighters still hunting for survivors. Even if they reached the escape pods, most would be shot down before they could get away. But staying meant certain death for everyone still alive. "Launch all pods," Park ordered. "Signal Captain Song to cover our retreat if her ship is still operational." The Asclepius was barely functional, but Song managed to position her destroyer between the escape pods and the Keth fighters. Her final act was to overload her ship's reactor, creating an explosion that cleared a path through the enemy formation. Park was in the last escape pod to launch, and she carried with her the ship's complete database of medical records and research. As her pod fled the dying Hippocrates, she activated the emergency communication system and sent a final message toward Earth. "This is Admiral Jiwon Park of the Terran Medical Corps," she said as tears ran down her face. "The Mercy Fleet has been destroyed by Keth forces. 50,000 medical personnel are dead, including our finest doctors and researchers. They lured us here with fake suffering and murdered us when we came to help." The Hippocrates exploded, behind her pod in a flash of white light that briefly outshone the system's star. Park continued her message as debris from humanity's greatest hospital ship rained down around her. "The healers are gone," she said with a voice full of grief and rage. "The galaxy chose war over mercy. Show them what that choice means." The message. Transmission ended just as Keth fighters found Park's escape pod. She died still clutching the medical records of the thousands of species her people had saved over the years. Her last thought was a prayer that someone would remember the good Earth's healers had tried to do. In the wreckage of the Veltac system floated the remains of 12 hospital ships and 50,000 of the most compassionate people humanity had ever produced. The galaxy's greatest healers were dead, and with them died the age of mercy that had made the universe a better place for everyone. Warlord Thrakmos surveyed the destruction with satisfaction. The humans and their weak philosophy of healing were finished. Now the galaxy could return to the proper way of doing things through strength and conquest, rather than mercy and compassion. He had no way of knowing that his victory would prove to be the worst mistake in galactic history. He had no way of knowing that humanity's capacity for healing had only existed because of their even greater capacity for restraint. He had killed the healers, and now something else would take their place. The message was already traveling toward Earth, carrying news of the massacre and Admiral Park's final words. Soon humanity would learn what had happened to their children, and the galaxy would discover what humans looked like when they stopped trying to heal and started trying to hurt. The message from Admiral Park reached Earth 12 hours after the massacre. President Sun Ho-yoon was in a council meeting when his aide brought him the emergency transmission. The color drained from his face as he watched the final moments of the Mercy Fleet and heard Park's dying words about showing the galaxy what their choice meant. Admiral Tae-hyung Lee was summoned to the presidential palace within minutes. He arrived to find Yoon staring out the window at the construction yards where new hospital ships had been taking shape. Those yards would never build another ship of healing again. 50,000 of our children are dead, Yoon said without turning around. They went to save lives and were murdered for their compassion. Lee watched the construction crews working on the half-built hospital ships below. Soon, those same workers would be building something very different. The galaxy had made its choice, and humanity would honor that decision. "What are your orders, sir?" Lee asked. "Activate Protocol 7, Yoon replied. "Full military mobilization. Every resource we use to save lives will now be used to end them." Protocol 7 had been created decades ago but never implemented. It was humanity's contingency plan for the unthinkable scenario where their peaceful nature was completely rejected by the galaxy. Lee had hoped he would never see the day when it became necessary. Within hours, the transformation began. The shipyards. that had built the Great White Hospital ships were retooled to produce vessels of war. The medical research facilities that had cured diseases began developing new ways to cause death. The compassionate people who had dedicated their lives to healing turned their skills toward darker purposes. Dr. Yuna Han was one of only 300 survivors pulled from the wreckage of the Mercy Fleet. She lay in a hospital bed on Earth, with burns covering half her body, but her mind was perfectly clear. The Keth had murdered her patients and destroyed everything she had worked for. Now they would learn what a human looked like when Mercy died. "I want to join the military," Han told Admiral Lee when he visited her in the medical center. "My knowledge of alien physiology could be useful in combat applications." Lee studied the burned woman who had spent her career making alien children smile. Now she wanted to use that same knowledge to make their parents suffer. The galaxy had created this transformation and would have to live with the consequences. "We will need medical advisors for our new military units," Lee agreed. "Your expertise will be valuable." The first ships of humanity's new fleet were completed within weeks. They were nothing like the white hospital ships that had carried hope across the galaxy. These vessels were black as space with hulls designed to absorb sensor scans. They carried names like Thanatos and Nemesis and Requiem that spoke of endings rather than beginnings. Captain Jemin Kwan had commanded transport ships for the medical corps before the massacre. Now he stood on the bridge of the Thanatos, watching his crew prepare for their first combat mission. Every person aboard his ship had lost friends or family in the Veltac system, and they all wanted the same thing. "Target confirmed," reported his tactical officer. "Keth mining colony on asteroid 779, population approximately 50,000. "Any civilians?" Kwan asked, though he already knew the answer. "Keth do not distinguish between military and civilian targets," Dr. Han said from her position at the tactical station. "They consider all members of their species to be warriors." Kwan nodded and gave the order that would announce humanity's return to the galaxy. "Fire!" The Thanatos unleashed its weapons on the mining colony with surgical precision. Every shot was calculated to cause maximum damage to Keth physiology while minimizing collateral damage to equipment that might be useful. This was not random destruction, but careful elimination designed by people who understood exactly how different species could be hurt most efficiently. The colony died in minutes. 50,000 Keth who had been mining resources to build more warships were reduced to cosmic dust. There were no survivors and no witnesses. The black ship simply appeared, destroyed everything, and vanished back into space. Similar attacks began happening across Keth territory. Their outer colonies started going silent one by one. Ships that went to investigate found nothing but empty space where thriving settlements had once existed. The Keth military command tried to understand what was happening, but their enemies remained invisible. Admiral Lee coordinated the campaign from Earth, watching as humanity's new fleet systematically dismantled Keth infrastructure. Every target was chosen for maximum strategic impact. Every attack was timed to create maximum psychological effect. This was warfare conducted with the same methodical precision that had once been used to save lives. Reports from Keth Space indicate they are recalling fleet units from across their territory, his intelligence officer reported. They appear to be consolidating their forces around their core worlds. "Good," Lee replied. "Fear is making them predictable." The Keth had ruled through terror for centuries, but now they were experiencing something they had never felt before. An enemy that struck without warning and disappeared without trace. An enemy that seemed to understand their weaknesses better than they understood themselves. Warlord Thrakmos stood in his command center staring at reports of destroyed colonies and missing fleets. In 2 months, he had lost more territory than in the previous 10 years of warfare. Worse, his own commanders were beginning to question his leadership. What species could be doing this? Demanded General Vexikar as he studied the tactical displays. The attacks are too precise to be random. Pirates, but too small to be a major military power. Thrakmos had a growing suspicion about the identity of their mysterious enemy, but he did not want to believe it. The humans were healers, not warriors. Their ships were slow white vessels filled with medical equipment, not fast black ships that struck like ghosts. "Send reconnaissance ships to human space," Thrakmos ordered. "I want to know what Earth has been doing since we destroyed their medical fleet." The reconnaissance mission never returned. It had been intercepted by Captain Kwan's task force and eliminated before it could report what it had found. The Keth would learn the truth about their enemy soon enough, but not yet. Humanity was not ready to reveal itself completely. President Yoon addressed the people of Earth for the first time since the massacre. He stood before cameras wearing black instead of his usual white ceremonial robes. Behind him hung the flag of the Terran Medical Corps, but the Red Cross had been replaced with a black skull. "For 50 years we offered the galaxy healing," Yoon said in a voice that carried across every human world. "We built hospitals instead of warships. We sent doctors instead of soldiers. We chose to save lives rather than take them." Yoon paused and looked directly into the camera. "The galaxy rejected our gift. They murdered our healers and destroyed our mercy. Very well. If they prefer war to peace, then war is what they shall have." The speech was broadcast across known space, and every species heard humanity's declaration. Some governments tried to send diplomatic messages expressing regret for the loss of the medical corps, but Earth did not respond. The time for words had passed. Dr. Han stood in a laboratory that had once been used to develop cures for alien diseases. Now she worked on weapons that would target the specific genetic weaknesses of different species. Her burned face showed no emotion as she perfected delivery systems that would make biological warfare frighteningly effective. "The Keth have a vulnerability in their respiratory system," she reported to Admiral Lee during their weekly briefing. "A modified version of the Centauri plague could eliminate their ability to process oxygen." Lee made notes on his tablet as Han described how to turn healing knowledge into killing tools. Every disease she had helped cure was now being studied as a potential weapon. Every species the Medical Corps had saved was having their weaknesses cataloged for future use. "Begin production immediately," Lee ordered. "I want options available for every major Keth population center." The galaxy had wanted to see what humanity looked like without their healers. Soon they would have their answer, and it would be more terrible than anyone had imagined. The same knowledge that had saved millions of lives was about to be used to end them in ways that would make the Keth's simple violence look merciful by comparison. In the depths of space, the black ships continued their work. They moved like shadows, between stars carrying death instead of hope. Each vessel was crewed by people who had once dedicated their lives to preserving life and now used that same dedication to perfect the art of ending it. The galaxy's age of mercy was over, and the age of reckoning had begun. 6 months after the massacre at Velthak, the Keth Dominion was dying. Half their territory had been conquered by an enemy they still could not see clearly. Their colonies went silent one by one. Their fleets disappeared without sending distress calls. Their strongest worlds were isolated and under siege by forces that struck like lightning and vanished like smoke. Warlord Thrakmos sat on his throne aboard the massive fortress ship Destroyer of Worlds and watched his empire crumble on, the tactical displays around him. Every report brought news of another defeat. Every day brought his enemies closer to the Keth homeworld. "Sir, we are receiving a transmission on all frequencies," his communications officer reported with fear in his voice. The main screen activated and showed a human face that Thrakmos recognized from intelligence files. Admiral Taehyung Lee had once commanded Earth's small defensive fleet. Now he wore the black uniform of something called the Terran War Fleet, and his eyes held the cold certainty of someone who had moved beyond anger into pure calculation. "Warlord Thrakmos," Lee said in a voice like winter. I am Admiral Lee of the Terran Military Forces. We have come to collect payment for your crimes against our people. Behind Lee, the screen showed images that made Thrakmos's blood freeze. Hundreds of black warships surrounded the Keth homeworld. They had appeared without warning, just as his forces had done at Veltak. But these ships were larger and more advanced than anything the Keth had ever built. You destroyed our healers, Lee continued. You murdered 50,000 civilians whose only crime was offering you compassion. Today you learn what happens when humanity stops healing and starts hurting. The transmission ended and space erupted into violence once again. But this time, it was Keth ships that burned and Keth warriors who died screaming. The human fleet moved with deadly precision that made their previous stealth attacks look like gentle warnings. Captain Jayemin Kwan commanded the spearhead assault from the bridge of the Thanatos. His ship had grown larger and more deadly over the months of war. Where it had once carried weapons designed to disable, now it mounted guns that could crack planets. Target the fortress ship, Kwan ordered his crew. I want Thrakmos to see his empire die before we kill him. The Thanatos opened. Fire with weapons that had been designed by people who understood exactly how much force was needed to cause maximum pain before death. The fortress ship's shields collapsed under bombardment that had been calculated to prolong suffering rather than end it quickly. Dr. Yuna Han monitored the battle from the tactical center and watched Keth ships die with the same clinical interest she had once shown when studying diseases. Her burned face showed no emotion as she guided weapons designed from her knowledge of alien biology. Their ships are losing life support faster than expected, Han reported. The Keth respiratory weakness is more pronounced under combat stress. Adjust fire patterns to take advantage, Kwan replied. Let them suffocate slowly. The last major Keth fleet died around their homeworld in a battle that lasted 6 hours. Human ships tore through their formations like surgical instruments cutting away diseased tissue. Every shot was precise. Every kill was calculated. Every death served a strategic purpose in the larger plan to eliminate the Keth as a threat forever. Thrakmos found himself alone on his dying ship watching his throne room, filled with toxic gas from ruptured life support systems. The humans had targeted his vessel's weaknesses with knowledge that could only have come from detailed study of Keth physiology. They knew exactly how to make his people suffer. The main screen activated one final time and showed Admiral Lee standing in what had once been the Hippocrates medical bay. Behind him were display cases filled with the burned medical equipment recovered from the massacre site. The instruments that had once saved lives now served as monuments to humanity's transformation. Your empire is finished, Lee told the dying warlord. Your people are scattered and your fleets are destroyed, but we are not done with you yet. Lee gestured to someone off-screen, and President Sun Ho-yoon stepped into view. The human leader looked older than he had 6 months ago, and his eyes held depths of grief that would never heal completely. The Terran Medical Corps is officially disbanded, Yoon announced to the galaxy. Our ships will no longer carry the Red Cross of healing. Our people will no longer answer distress calls from alien worlds. The age of mercy is over. Yoon paused and looked directly at Thrakmos through the screen. You taught us that compassion was weakness. You showed us that healing was foolishness. Very well. From this day forward, humanity will give the galaxy exactly what it has demonstrated it deserves. The transmission ended as Thrakmos finally succumbed to the poison gas filling his throne room. The last warlord of the Keth Dominion died alone on his ruined ship, surrounded by the wreckage of his empire. But the war was not over. Admiral Lee had larger plans than simply destroying the species that killed his people. The galaxy needed to learn a lesson that would never be forgotten. In the weeks that followed, human fleets appeared in systems across known space. They did not attack immediately. Instead, they broadcast the same message to every world they visited. The transmission showed footage from the Veltak massacre followed by images of the Keth homeworld burning. "This is what happens to those who attack Earth's children," the message stated simply. "Choose your friends wisely." Species that had once called for human medical aid now trembled when the black ships appeared in their skies. Governments that had taken Earth's healers for granted suddenly realized what they had lost. The gentle white ships that had carried hope across the stars had been replaced by vessels of judgment that carried only death. Dr. Hans stood in her new laboratory aboard, the command ship Nemesis, and worked on projects that would have horrified her younger self. She was developing weapons tailored to the specific weaknesses of every major species in the galaxy. If any of them chose to follow the Keth example, they would discover that humanity's knowledge of healing could be turned to darker purposes. "The Altarian government has requested a meeting," Admiral Lee informed her during their daily briefing. "They want to discuss restoring diplomatic relations." "Do they have anything we need?" Han asked, without looking up from her work. "Nothing we cannot take by force if necessary," Lee replied. Han nodded and returned to her research. The Altarians had been among the species that benefited most from human medical aid in the past. Now they would learn that mercy, once rejected, could never be restored. Captain Kwan's fleet patrolled the borders of what had once been Keth space and intercepted any ships trying to flee the destroyed empire. Some carried refugees seeking asylum with other species. Others carried military units hoping to continue their raids from new bases. All were destroyed without warning or mercy. The lesson needed to be complete. The galaxy that had once looked to Earth for healing now lived in fear of humanity's black ships. Trade routes changed to avoid human patrol areas. Diplomatic meetings included discussions of what to do about the new threat from Earth. Species that had been enemies found common cause in their terror of what humanity had become. But it was already too late. The transformation was complete and irreversible. Earth had tried to be the galaxy's healer and been rejected violently. Now they would serve as its executioner with the same dedication they had once shown to preserving life. President Yoon gave his final address to the human, people from the ruins of the old Medical Corps headquarters. Behind him, construction crews were building something new. The white buildings that had trained doctors and nurses were being replaced with black structures that would train soldiers and executioners. "We offered our hands in healing and they were cut off," Yoon said to the cameras. "We offered our hearts in compassion and they were torn out. We offered our children as saviors and they were murdered for their kindness." Yoon looked directly into the camera with eyes that held no warmth or mercy. The galaxy made its choice. It chose war over peace. It chose death over life. It chose fear over love. Very well. We will give them exactly what they asked for. The speech was broadcast across human space and beyond. Every species heard humanity's promise and understood that something fundamental had changed in the balance of galactic power. The healers were gone and something far more terrible had taken their place. In the years that followed, no species dared to attack human interests. The black ships with the Death's Head insignia became symbols of absolute retribution that could not be escaped or negotiated with. The galaxy had wanted to see what humanity looked like without its compassion. Now they knew, and they would never forget the lesson. Earth's children had once been angels of mercy who brought healing to the stars. The galaxy had murdered those. Angels, and in their place had created demons of judgment who brought only death. The age of healing was over and the age of reckoning would last forever.